Welcome to The Digital Patient, where we discuss the latest advancements in digital patient engagement and share stories from the front lines. I'm your host, Alan Sardana, and with me as always is SeamlessMD's CEO, Dr. Joshua Liu. Today, we're joined by our very special guest, Dr. Ash Goel. Dr. Goel is a distinguished healthcare leader with over 25 years of experience, currently serving as Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer at Bronson Healthcare. He oversees technology strategy and digital innovation for the system. Dr. Goel, Ash, welcome to the show.
Thank you. My pleasure. Yeah, I don't know if I deserve any of those initial introductions. I could start with, this is the guy who causes trouble. That's probably it.
Well, that is absolutely not true. You've had such a dynamic career in medicine and healthcare IT. You've practiced medicine actually on 3 different continents. And now as a CIO of Bronson Medical Group, you've been instrumental in facilitating the use of technology to improve quality, patient care, and the patient and provider experience. I'm curious, just to start the conversation, can you take us way back? What inspired you to get into healthcare?
Because I was dumb. Didn't know what else to do. A lot goes into that story, right? I think I'll start by saying we never know where we all end up. So we make some small steps in the direction we think we believe in at the time when we start that journey. And for me, perhaps 2 things were most influential. One goes back to the time when I was a middle schooler. My maternal grandfather was a very well-renowned orthopedic surgeon. And I was, of course, looking up to role models, and he was not only well-respected in the community, but well-respected in the healthcare community. And beyond that, he was an academic. He had been recognized by his peers. He ultimately became the dean of the medical school that he was at. And those things, when you're a starry-eyed kid, probably go, boy, I wish I could be half like him, right? So that's what inspired me to think about it. And then a little bit later on, this was during my high school time, long time ago, my father had a significant medical event. He had a road accident, just something that happens to all of us once in a while in our lives, which just completely change our personal experiences. The car basically had a head-on with an animal, swerved off the highway, tremendous injuries. The ecosystem of healthcare, the clinicians that came together to save his life, he spent about 6 months in the hospital and in rehabilitation. And I saw 2 things. One, the power of healing. And more importantly than that, what an impact that his own attitude to his outcomes had. Because 3 months after coming out of the hospital, he was back on a very busy, I call it massive job portfolio that he held at that time. Not stopping ever. He did not retire till he was 78. Did not have to take any medications, did not have to do anything. He worked his way out of that massive event to be better than what he was before. So that sort of informs both sides of why medicine and why who patients are is important to me.
So Dr. Goel, it doesn't sound like your father was necessarily a techie, but clearly at some point you got bit by the technology bug in healthcare. How did that happen?
I wasn't a techie either, but goes back to the earlier comment about the journeys and the paths we take. I happened to meet my future wife at a hospital that I was practicing intensivist at, and she happened to be in the tech world. And I did not want to appear to be too dumb. So I tried to figure out, hey, what is that world? And then that was just my initial, foray into trying to better understand technology. But then as practice of medicine has continued to evolve, how embedded technology was becoming into my ability to do what I needed to do. And this goes into the late 1990s. The part that perhaps was most important during that time, again, points to my stupidity in those assumptions, is that belief that I could do better than those techies. They don't know what they're doing. So problem solving, fundamentally believing that we can do better than where we are at, and then this hubris that I can do better than everybody else. drove me into taking on very politely, but mostly about helping. This wasn't about me taking over the world. It's always about I'm here to help. I would rather that it be done to me, that I be part of what is done to me. And that's how I sort of gradually got more directly involved in that part of the work. And then as I entered into it, what my fundamental shift was is that I believe that the magnitude of impact that comes from an individual magnifies many, many fold when I can do better, both with technology and also help others do better with technology. I'll stop there.
Well, that's wonderful. And, you've been in the IT or healthcare IT world now for, it's almost coming up 2 decades. So it's quite incredible. One thing I love highlighting things that really make our guests unique. And one of those, outside of your day-to-day, you're also an avid mountain climber. And, in the past, I've read you've climbed Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, and more recently, some mountains that are a bit more indigenous to the United States. How do you think mountain climbing has actually made you a better CIO?
Well, first off, I probably just feel like I need to get away from all of this and be myself so that I'm not screaming at myself or screaming at everybody else around me. No, that's being just facetious. But I think the real answer is why I climb mountains. And why I climb mountains is because it illustrates the point every time I'm up on the mountain is that it's not about getting there, it's about how you get there. And that realization helps me do my job better because I can look past the leaves on the trees. I can live and look past the fires on the trees because all of us live in ecosystems where there's lots of things happening at the same time and lots of fires burning everywhere. I wouldn't claim that I can extinguish forest fires, but at least it gives me the big picture to where we're trying to go and what we're trying to solve. So that's what helps me be a better leader and be a better CIO, which is to both know the target, understand the myriad of paths we can take, and then try to chart the best path out, sometimes backtrack, sometimes make mistakes and learn from them, and realize that there's many, many, many paths to get up there. And then I'll end with the last part of this, which is being able to trust the team, because mountaineering is not an individual sport. It is about having people around you, with you, that plan with you, and you can rely on absolutely when you are hanging off a 200-foot drop on a harness and the only support is the person who's belaying you and that anchor that is holding you. Then you got to trust in those parts and the system. That's what this is about.
And I guess part of the analogy too is, like you mentioned, mountaineering is very often a team activity, a team sport. It's not enough for just Dr. Goel to make it to the top of the mountain. You don't feel successful unless the whole team safely gets all the way to the top together.
Yeah, that kind of goes to that leadership philosophy also, right? It's about, I would even add something else. And this maybe goes back to pointing to something that perhaps we don't always obviously realize. The first 2 individuals that successfully climbed Mount Everest, right? Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. Do you know which one of them reached the top first?
I thought it was Hillary. No?
No. They made a pact. They're never going to tell. And they died with that with them because it wasn't about getting there first.
I like that.
So that's something that I wanted to build on what you just said. It's not about me getting to the top. It's not even about the team getting to the top. It's about the mission getting accomplished. And to me personally, I would rather be the last person getting to the top, making sure that the rest of the team is successful so that I can follow the last person up to the top.
Can I ask you a mountaineering question that's unrelated to healthcare?
Yeah, sure.
So I really loved that free solo documentary. What do you think about free soloing? Crazy, something you might do someday?
No, not because it's crazy. It is indeed absolutely crazy. And I think it requires a huge amount of emotional constraint and ability to control your inherent fears of what Alex was doing when he was doing that. Now, there's a huge endorphin rush at the end of that. Each one of us fill our cup with many different ways of feeling accomplished. And mine is not that.
Me too.
I would rather be the guy that is not very evident in the documentary. His name is Jimmy Chin. Jimmy was ahead of Alex, strapped in anchors and ropes, but climbing faster than Alex was, carrying the camera and the gear, making sure that the story of Alex got told and be in the background, right? So I'm okay with being Jimmy because I'm facilitating Alex to get to where he's trying to go.
I like that.
That's a great analogy. So, Dr. Goel, you mentioned trust in people and trust in your team and trust in the systems. Trust also, something that you've said in the past, plays a huge role in recovery and patience. The story of your father is a great example of that, their motivation to recover. You've shared in the past with us directly how trust really allows your patients to open up. So if you're vulnerable with them, if you can make it so that they are able to trust you, if they really share and become ready for recovery. Can you unpack that idea for us and maybe share how you believe technology can contribute in building trust and relationships?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Right. That is the fundamental premise to why I believe technology has a huge role to play in healthcare. How much time do you have?
Yeah.
3 decades?
Yeah.
Let's unpack 2 parts of this question. The first is about trust and the power of trust. This goes to why humans work with each other and why we are in a social contract to coexist in the society. You walk down the street late in the evening, trusting that you're going to be able to make it back to your home safe and sound in an environment that is allowing you to do what you need to do what you enjoy. Went out for dinner, went out with friends, went to visit family, went out for a show, whatever else. That inherently requires a certain amount of trust. This interaction here today engenders that you trust me that I will not come out with some really insane, off-the-wall, foul-mouthed, whatever comments, although you have the power to edit me out. So it's the skeptical trust that you built in me. In healthcare, we as experts have been entrusted with the duty by our patients, our communities, our families, and caregivers to do what is right for them. And from there, we built these very large systems and processes that mostly, if you were to leave it up to the lawyers, will tell you are designed to keep us in the guardrails of what we should do. And why we do that is because we don't have trust in absoluteness of that relationship. So when we write a contract, the contract is not written to be circumspect about the trust, but to guard the trust. At some point, if you guys have more time than you ever want in your life, should read a book or a treatise written by a French philosopher, Jacques Rousseau. He's written many books. One of this is called The Social Contract, and he talks about the idea of individual will and general will and what you give up to create the general will, which then allows for the social contract to be in place to allow us to coexist. Okay. And our systems are not inherently always fostering that trust. Our financial systems, our information gaps, our knowledge gaps. And that's why we create all these very complex systems. In my ideal world, we talk about navigating healthcare. I challenge that notion by saying, why do we need navigation of healthcare? Because we do not trust the system or the interaction between a service provider and a service receiver, that they will do what is in that social contract, do the right thing all the time. So we create processes, we create systems. That therein creates lots of complexities, which if you are a systems thinker, you will realize that every new process or step in the process you add, you create a new variable, which creates a new break in the chain. For me, fundamentally, so I'm going to pull something from business finance or from Milton Friedman about this idea of perfect markets, perfect sharing of information. When there's perfect sharing of information, seamless delivery of services, everything is priced to exactly what we value it to be. That's what I believe technology could or should allow us to do, to give perfect information at zero cost amongst all the players in an interaction. Do we do that? Not really. That's called arbitrage. And that arbitrage then creates incentives, payers for life sciences, for medical device manufacturers, for health systems, for governments, for individuals, which creates the economic cycle around us. Hence the question, what is that ideal? So I fundamentally would like to believe that technology is at its core about removing that arbitrage, which then goes back to that idea of empowering the patient, empowering the consumer, letting them get to the best answer by having the perfect information that they can hold us accountable to be better deliverers of that service. Okay. That's why I started by saying, do you have 3 decades?
I guess to go to your point, it sounds like in the ideal world, technology can be this great equalizer where, for a patient or a consumer, you can have that standardized experience because you're not relying on humans who may be different in terms of their quality of care or commitment to navigating the patient journey or all of that. Probably, I guess lately people are hoping AI can accelerate technology being that equalizer. At the same time, we also know that at least with things like generative, there's an increased risk of hallucination or other kind of risks with AI. And I think one of the things we realize is that, whether it's AI or technology, the error rate will never be 0%. I mean, it's close. Humans are not error free as well. So I'm kind of curious, as you see AI use and generative, especially in healthcare, that adoption being accelerated lately, how are you thinking about ensuring safe use of it as it gets to more scale?
Right. Yeah, so there's a tactical and a strategic answer to that question. I'll start with the bigger picture and then I'll talk about it more direct. How do I think about using this? And I'm going to tie this back to the earlier question. So I'm not in any stretch of imagination suggesting that we can solve the problems of healthcare delivery using generative AI or any technologies, because there is no frictionless information sharing system out there. And there probably will never be. And the reason why I say that is we assume that systems are rational. And I think there's one part of this human equation that makes us not really rational consumers of information. Our brains are wired to have heuristics-based biases, whether those are societal biases or they're experiential biases, or they are, I'll call them, what's the polite way of saying, emotional biases, I guess is what I'll leave it at. So it's about incentives, right? So we all have incentives that create bias. Walking down the street requires us to have a heuristic model of what does walking look like. Hearing a car in the background, I am automatically moving to the side. That's a heuristic that we built when we were a child or before we were born even, because you could have that audio input in our brain somehow. Anyway, that's why there's not a perfect technology out there, because we are trying to create rational processes around irrational consumption of processes. Then we layer on to that, how do I think current evolution of error-prone generative artificial intelligence, predictive or narrow models, or even the singularity-based Pollyanna models, will they ever get to what we are trying to get to? No, because that doesn't change what my expectation of what I expect from a system to do for me. I may expect something entirely different based on my own heuristics and biases of what I want. The way forward for us in healthcare is certainly to start using these technologies in low-risk areas to start reducing the cognitive burden that people have first in processes, then in decision making, and then in understanding perhaps are we ready to step into the decision making as it relates to clinical care. That goes back to the conversations that I think we had earlier, where if you look at that Pew Center's research on consumer behavior as it relates to artificial intelligence and healthcare, right? That consumers say healthcare needs to do more by using artificial intelligence. But they also say or believe that don't make decisions about me using AI. I would rather trust the doctor. That's not because they believe that the system is better or not better. They want us as process organizers to be more efficient, to be better. But they also want the old trust relationship between the clinician and them to stay, at least for now, till we are able to prove to them, perhaps, if ever, that the systems are bias-free enough and error-free enough that they would be comfortable with making those decisions. And ultimately, our legal system and our financial systems will also have to come along to decide that if decision is made, whose liability and whose financial interests lay at the heart of making that decision. Currently, we don't have that answer because most of the AI systems are going to not propose that when the doctor pushes that button, that they take the liability for that decision. Okay? They're going to want me to take that liability.
One imperfect analogy that comes to mind as you're describing this is I wonder how adoption of AI and implementation will go in healthcare, maybe looking to how GPS in transportation, how that's leading to autonomous vehicles is playing out. So, if you think about it, GPS for driving was kind of almost like having a software co-pilot for the driver. We were still driving it manually, but we were relying on the GPS to navigate the journey from A to B. Now with autonomous driving, we're seeing full-fledged, AI controlling the wheel. And now that there are a few accidents that have happened, as I'm sure you've seen the news, I'm curious to see what's going to happen with litigation, because if there's no physical human driver, probably the company will argue, well, the human in the vehicle technically could have overridden the AI. But as you can imagine, probably most humans at some point will just trust the AI driving the car, who's going to be liable if accidents do happen. Although I think folks will argue that the error rate will be very, very low compared to human driver, and that's worth something. Healthcare is far more complicated, I think, and clinical care is far more complex than driving a vehicle. But we're going to see now finally the adoption of our version of the GPS, the co-pilot for healthcare, where the clinician is still making the final decision. But to your point, you could imagine, at least for certain use cases, some point where it gets close to that autonomous, driving in healthcare, and what use cases are going to make sense, what won't be, and what will happen if there is litigation. I don't know, but maybe we'll learn something from transportation that could give us a framework for healthcare.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great analogy, and I've thought about that often. And then you probably have heard about those paradoxes of, do I kill the one pedestrian or do I kill the 20 on the side? Those kind of things, right? And how do you make those choices? And that's where irrationality or rationality are humans comes in. And then you get into the discussions on morality of decisions as well. But I'll add something else to this that maybe hasn't crossed our minds yet, or it has, and we have not yet spoken about it here today. And this goes to the trends of change. You and I shouldn't presume what you think about this. I know that my memory span and my ability to make decisions is much more informed by saliency of what I experienced today, yesterday, or the last 2 days, as opposed to 2 years ago or 20 years ago. And certainly not from a generation ago or a generation 5 years ago, right? What has changed over the last 4, 5, 10,000 years of human evolution is the pace of change has been just exponentially skyrocketing. And what we haven't factored in is adaptability of the society along with that pace of change. So while we are pushing for adoption of technologies and adoption of systems like generative AI, the ramifications of the adoption to the society are fundamentally going to be much harder, much more gut-wrenching, and disruptive, if not dystopian, to us than we can imagine. As you've heard probably many, many, many people say this, right? What we believe today isn't going to be true day after tomorrow or 5 years from now, certainly not, right? That's the part that I worry about. And short-termism that we have in the current race to get to the top of the AI heap is going to make me very, very nervous.
It's a great point. Actually, it leads me into my next question. You've highlighted in the past the need for or the importance of designing systems that fit our needs, not just for the patient, but also the families, the caregivers. What are some of the most important ways that technology can be used to better engage everybody in that equation?
I think that's where a distributed model of ownership of technology and speed of adoption is important, which is where, for me in healthcare, it's not about me making the decision. It is about the consumer making the decision to what they want, when they want it, and how they want it. It is hard to find the perfect balance because the other side of this argument will be to say, well, if we don't know what is out there, how can we consume what we don't have an idea exists out there? So part of that is about our responsibility under that social contract to start experimenting and to start saying, hey, these are the possibilities of where we can take you. What is the journey you want to come along with us? Right? And we frame that differently in different, I'll call them verticals. I'll even call them in different business models, or even we started by saying different societies, because I have experienced what expectations are in 3 different types of medical care systems, and they are very different expectations. So adapting to what that expectation is at that point in time. A consumer in Asia is perhaps very different than a consumer in the Middle East. It's very different than a consumer in the Americas. So I don't really have a single answer for you in that space. I can tell you what is it here now today, but what it'll be tomorrow will be informed by what I do so poorly today on.
Right.
So I did want to kind of double click into that, the idea of experimentation and being really the pioneers of discovery for technology that can bridge that gap. I'm curious, in terms of the economic conditions that we find ourselves in today, what's the viability of some of these experiments? Like, how are you balancing that short-term and long-term vision and goals?
And I think therein lies that incentive for us to partner across, because while the economic conditions at least in the US, are such that there is lots of pressures, particularly on the healthcare delivery side, to build leadership models that allow space for experimentation. And I think of 2 different aspects of it. There's a traditional model of leadership where it's essentially do everything that is right by the institution and follow the MBA playbook or follow the leadership playbook of healthcare, do what is needed. And then there is the model of what is the unique stamp that Ash can put on that. And that's where my own personal style or brand value of leadership shows up, to say, I believe that experimentation is part of my DNA, and I believe exploration is part of my DNA. And I'm going to work to bridge that gap by influence, by building political capital, by building bridges across institutions to allow for room for experimentation with the expectation of failure, to say. And it's not that crazy to think that we might be living on Mars one day, right? Or I may get my brain uploaded into a computer model and live forever. Trust me, I'm not going there. I don't want to do that. I'm not that crazy. But in some notion of the world, I think I'd recently heard this term you may have heard. There used to be a club apparently in the 1960s called the Extropian Group. This is the Silicon Valley back end of some really out there people that have talked about this in the 60s. What does that lead up to? Entropy is disorder. Extropy is everything is in order. It's that sort of very Pollyanna future view of we are all uploaded in the computer. We don't have to worry about everything else in the world is a utopia. So I think some rational part of that really is about saying experimentation is in our DNA. And that's my brand to say we are going to do that, because if we don't do so, status quo is not acceptable. So how are you going to get there?
How do you make that case in today's climate? So, before 2020, there was a lot more experimentation and innovation going on in healthcare. And then now with, some health systems certainly still in the red and trying to, recover financially, it's a much harder case as a technology leader to convince your leadership partners that like, hey, we should try something different, as opposed to, hey, let's just do the things that we know work.
Yep.
How do you make that case in today's times with your leadership partners?
I hope they're not listening to this.
We're going to send it to them.
You should, because maybe then they will kind of put me in the doghouse, which is where I belong. That's about the irrationality of human decision making. That's about what makes us human, because we will tie into, I'll simply ask, Josh, you trust me, right? I have done these things in the past, and some of them have turned out okay. If you believe me, some of them will turn out okay. I'm going to use the irrationality of human mind with a very positive sort of spin on it. This is not about me wanting to build my own crazy idea, but this is about saying, hey, we are building a better tomorrow. And if we trust that we are, we got to experiment. And in order to experiment, we need to take risks. And how do we take risks is up to us to define what is our bandwidth of standard deviation from the standard model. Right? And that's why I am in the technology role, and the CFO is in the role of the CFO, because she is going to count the last cent, and I'm going to round it to the closest 1,000s, if not the closest 1 million.
I mean, to your point, I think I learned two things just now. One is, if you've earned that trust over time and you've built that track record, they can have confidence in your judgment around what experiments are worth doing or not doing right now. Then I think the second thing I learned was the only way to get to that better future state is to not do everything the same over and over. Like, you have no choice but to do at least some things differently if you want to either get to a new future state or at least get to that future state faster than the current path. You can't just keep doing everything the same, at least.
Yeah. Columbus would never have sailed, or Vasco da Gama would never have circumnavigated the Earth if they believed that the Earth was flat.
Totally fair. Absolutely. One of the other things that you've shared with us, Dr. Goel, is the idea that hyperspecialization is the bane of healthcare. For those who are not as familiar with that line of thinking, what does that mean exactly? Can you unpack that?
Sure. Yeah, I think what I mean by that is, in our desire to continue to improve and self-improve upon ourselves, we have created many, many silos in how we deliver current care. So we may have some violin players, we may have some tuba players, we may have clarinet players and flute players. We don't always have the conductor of the orchestra. We may not have the same sheet of music in front of every player, or they may interpret that differently. And then we end up in wondering, why are we playing out of tune? That's what I mean by hyperspecialization. That goes back to the information gaps we create, the frictions we create, and then we add more things. Oh, we need a heart failure navigator, or we need a cancer care navigator, or we need a patient advocate. Those things are needed because we created barriers. Those things are not needed because we created a perfect system. And then on top of that, we treat our patients as our consumers as being dumb, or they don't know what they're doing. We don't ask them the questions of what they're doing, why they're doing it. A while back, I think the Cleveland Clinic had pushed out a marketing campaign. Have you ever seen or run across that one that talks about, if only you could see what they see? Have you ever run across that video?
Yeah, I have.
Oh, from the patient perspective.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think Alan, I think we have seen that. Right? Yeah.
It's a pretty powerful story, right? Because we assume a lot of things. I assume a lot of things about what my wife thinks when I show up late every night. I'm in the corner, trying to hide away from her, saying, I didn't do these 5 things because I had other things to do. And or maybe she's just saying, hey, he must be tired. He needs this, this, and this. He's not coming at it, but she's not coming at it with 10,000 different tasks for me to do. So those assumptions that we build in are what create a lot of problems. And then systems thinking, we've talked about this earlier already. It's about each time we create hyper-specialization, we add more variables, more broken points, more errors. And those errors are going to magnify and create more errors. So that's why I think of that as the bane of what our current model looks like, because we think we have created a better mousetrap where we have simply created this massive puzzle that nobody knows how to navigate.
I think your comment about how hyper-specialization doesn't necessarily lead to better outcomes or experiences kind of reminds me of when I think about a chef's kitchen, just having more people in the kitchen who each specialize further and further doesn't mean you end up with a better dish for the customer, right? I mean, imagine you had only one person could work on the carrots, only one person could touch the onions. And when you think about it, you're like, actually, the fewer people in the kitchen who can actually integrate across all the different ingredients and utensils and equipment and techniques would probably lead to a much better dish. And that's a very simplified example. But to your point, there's clearly some breaking point where there's too much hyper-specialization. There's too many cooks in the kitchen. More is not always better when you're trying to deliver a great end product. It makes a lot of sense.
For us in technology, what we've tried to do is we just call it a different thing. We call it building fusion teams, where we bring people from different areas together to ultimately deliver on a common product or a common idea, so that the ownership is not, I'm going to turn this widget and that person's going to turn that widget. I'm going to own the end product, and which widgets we turn depends upon what moment we are at.
I love it.
Yeah, it goes back to what you were saying about distributed ownership. All right. Last question that I had, looking ahead, where do you see the future of healthcare delivery? You brought it up already, but personalization of care and preferences that consumers have. Where do you see it going 3, 5, 10 years from now?
I'll preface that by saying I hope to a better place than where it is at today. What I wish to see in that hope is that we continue to allow for tangential thinking. We continue to allow for experimentation, and we continue to devolve from large government-driven initiatives that try to bring everything into a singular bucket, because that constrains experimentation and that constrains solution delivery, because we are trying to paint everybody exactly the same. So I believe that in the next 5 to 10 years, the ability for us to find that balance between what economies of scale bring and what distributed solution delivery brings is going to get better than just sucking everything into a singular entity or singular delivery philosophy of care. I'm not saying Medicare for all is a bad thing. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that the processes that we use to solve our problems can't be driven by a single solution. It is going to be solutions that come from many parts, which is where I think that we get limited by our own design and our own technical designs as well, because we want a single answer to everything, and opening up that design to add solutions in the periphery that make the global solution better is how things are going to improve. In the world of healthcare IT, I think of that as the term that Gartner uses. They call it composability, composable architecture. You add things from the peripheries ultimately to make the whole better. The other way to look at this is about, I call it the 3 Ps paradigm: proximity and periphery, which unto itself is change happens in the periphery. The hope that we have is that we design solutions which are proximal or close to where the solution needs to be delivered at. And that shifts the paradigm that we build. And Uber is a classic example of this in the sense of you and I want a transport mechanism when we just got out of a restaurant. So the demand was generated at that point, not before I left to go wherever my errand to run was. The service is being delivered at the proximity to where the demand was generated. The demand was generated at that instant. The change in this ecosystem of the traditional cab service happened at the periphery. They started with just that solution. And that's changing the paradigm of what we expect transport systems of the future to look like, which is transport as a service, car ownership disappearing. That's the paradigm shift we are driving towards. Make sense?
It totally does. And I think just to kind of bring it back full circle with your mountain climbing analogy, there are so many different paths to take. And that's kind of the important part is that mission of figuring out which path to take and learning from mistakes and figuring out different ways to change the paradigm through the multiple paths that you could take. Yeah, that's wonderful. So just being mindful of your time, let's flip over to the Fast 5 lightning round. This is just 5 rapid fire questions for you. The first question we have is, what is your favorite book or book you've gifted the most?
Yeah, it's too many of them to pick on. I'll pick one. This is a collection of essays. It's called This I Believe. It's also a website. But this is a wonderful collection of books that have multiple essays written by many, many people, which simply try to answer what they believe in. And it covers many, many decades of that writing. And there's different editors that have collected those. And it's a huge paradigm shift when you start thinking about what these people believe in and why they believe in what they believe in, and then just understanding what they achieved because they believe in a very simple thing that led to some amazing stories. Okay? Yeah. So yeah, highly recommended to anybody who ever wants to think about it. The one that I read, it's edited by Jay Ellison and Dan Gediman.
Excellent. Question 2, who is a person, either dead or alive, you'd love to meet?
Can I pick 100?
Just one.
Just one? Just one. Well, I think, given my background and where I come from, one of the people that I would like to perhaps meet the most is not necessarily a person that I would call as my ideal, but a fascinating person. His name is Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah.
He was a pacifist, but he was a stubborn SOB. He also had a lot of fallacies, right? So I would love to understand what drove that person to do what he did, why he did. And then, just learn a little bit about, but there can be so many other people that I would list out there.
I love that. Question 3 is a bit different. Would you rather have super strength, super speed, or the ability to read people's minds?
These are very tough choices. Can I add another one? Call it super intelligence?
Yeah.
I think reading people's mind is a very scary place to be at. I want to give people not only the privacy, but also just the ability to be who they are, because we don't want to be in others' heads. I don't need super strength and I don't need super speed, but I need super emotional intelligence to be able to see how people feel and understand how people feel, because I just think that we are not intellectually ever going to be able to solve humanity's most difficult problem, which is to understand everything that is out there. So if we can just make people feel better about who they are, that's about it.
Yeah, I love that answer. Question 4, what is something in healthcare you believe that others might find insane?
That there exists a future where there is perfect information available for everybody to be able to have to make the best decisions possible without misaligned incentives. How you achieve that? Well, I think Gemini, ChatGPT, whatever one's out there, if we can get there, make everybody have all the medical knowledge they need to have to be able to take care of their own health. That's healthcare specific. I mean, ideally, you want everybody to have all the information they want. But fundamentally, it goes back to what is really humans want. And I think humans just want to feel better and feel loved and liked and respected. So if you can just deliver that, that'll be fine.
I love that. Last question that we have, if you could travel back in time to any event or moment, what would it be and why?
And go back to go to the future.
Sure, yeah. Why not?
Invent the travel machine and then go back to any of the movies that I want to go to.
Yeah.
Right. I think to that very specific question about being able to go back to the past, I think to the time when we realized that we could actually communicate and share ideas, because that built humanity in a way that we actually could build on each other and build a better collective we together, because that has made us who we are as a society. I would be fascinated. I know this wasn't a single moment in time, it was an evolution of it, but just that realization that we could actually communicate and pass that on, because that started the information revolution.
Yeah, I love all those answers. That is amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Goel Ash, again, for coming on the show. You shared so much wisdom with us. There are so many pearls throughout this conversation. I'm going to have to re-listen to it just to absorb all of it again. But that's a wrap for this episode of The Digital Patient, hosted by the SeamlessMD. You can follow us on Twitter at SeamlessMD. And if you like the podcast and you want to learn more, visit www.seamless.md. Dr. Goel, again, thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for letting me spout off some crazy ideas as well.